I want you to just take a second and imagine the absolute highest pinnacle of basketball.
Okay, yeah.
Just picture it in your mind right now. Close your eyes if you have to. What do you actually see?
Well, for almost everyone, the image that immediately flashes into your brain is a player hoisting the NBA championship trophy.
Exactly. The golden Larry O'Brien trophy catching the arena lights, the confetti is raining down, sticking to the sweat on the player's shoulders.
And the star is just completely surrounded by teammates.
Right, maybe crying into the coach's shoulder, clutching the finals MVP award in their other hand.
It's basically our collective cultural imagination, right? The ultimate team achievement.
You win together, you lose together, that whole thing.
Exactly.
But what if I told you that this entire image, this bedrock core belief we hold about this incredibly popular sport is actually based on lazy thinking?
Lazy thinking and, honestly, cultural brainwashing.
Yeah. A sport played by hundreds of millions of people globally, and we might have it all wrong.
It's a really jarring premise, isn't it? Because our brains, they inherently crave neat categorization.
Oh, totally. We love putting things in boxes.
We really do. We look at the world, we see 5 players on a court in matching jerseys, we see the coordinated pick and rolls.
We hear the coach barking out defensive schemes from the sideline.
Right, and we just slap the label team sport onto the whole enterprise. We accept the label without ever actually interrogating the foundation underneath it.
We mistake the presentation of a thing for the fundamental essence of the thing itself.
And that tension is exactly why we are plunging into this deep dive today.
We are looking at a genuinely fascinating, intensely rigorous debate that took place between two really deep thinkers.
Yeah, in the transcript we have, they are identified simply as Patrick and Arwax 4.
And they're locking horns over what seems on the surface like an incredibly simple, maybe even silly question.
But it spirals outwards so fast into this profound philosophical exploration.
It really does. So the central question they were debating is this: is basketball fundamentally a team sport, or is it fundamentally a 1v1 sport?
And what makes this exchange so compelling and frankly kind of exhausting to read in the best possible way is that neither of these individuals is willing to yield an inch of logical ground.
Not a single inch.
We are dissecting a raw transcript here where absolutely every assumption is challenged.
They weaponize analogies against each other.
They deconstruct the mechanics of games, they debate the nature of human intent.
And eventually they have to literally drag out the dictionary to settle the score.
Which is wild. So if you don't care about basketball at all, please do not tune out.
Absolutely not. This isn't just about sports.
No, this raises a huge question about how we form our understanding of reality. This is an exercise in critical thinking, specifically focusing on ontology.
Right. And for those who might not, spend their weekends reading ancient Greek philosophy, ontology is simply the study of the nature of being.
It's the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of what a thing is at its absolute core.
When you strip away the paint, the branding, the societal context, what is actually left?
This debate is just a stark look at how we allow the sheer cultural popularity of something to define its truth for us.
So by the time we finish this deep dive, your understanding of how to define the things in your own life is going to be entirely overturned.
Let's unpack this from the very beginning then. We have to start where the debate starts.
Which is with the cultural default. RI4 kicks things off by firmly planting their flag in the conventional wisdom.
RI4 asserts that basketball is, without a doubt, fundamentally a 5v5 team sport.
And honestly, reading RI4's opening volley, the reasoning seems pretty bulletproof.
It does. RI4 points out that even the greatest individual athlete to ever walk the planet cannot win a basketball championship without teammates.
Right. Teammates who can pass, who can defend the weak side, who can grab rebounds.
RI4 leans heavily into the mechanics of high-level success to prove this point. They acknowledge that individual stats are impressive.
Sure, you can drop 50 points in a game by yourself.
But nothing matches the ultimate teleological goal of the sport, which is winning the game, winning the title.
They point to the legends, right? Like, look at Michael Jordan.
Exactly. For the first several years of his career, Jordan was an absolute scoring machine.
Doing things literally no human had ever done on a court.
But he didn't win a championship until the Chicago Bulls built a team around him.
Until he had Scottie Pippen to defend and facilitate. Until he had Horace Grant to rebound.
Look at Bill Russell with his 11 rings. He was the ultimate team orchestrator.
So RI4's argument is basically that you can be the greatest dribbler in the universe, but the spatial reality of the game is literally 5 human beings versus 5 human beings.
If your 4 teammates cannot execute their roles, you are mathematically and strategically doomed.
Therefore, RICE4 concludes the team element isn't just a feature, it is fundamental to the sport's existence as a competitive enterprise.
See, I read that, and my brain goes, yep, makes sense, case closed.
Totally. It feels so intuitive. But then Patrick comes in with this explosive, almost offensive counterargument.
Yeah, Patrick looks at all of that history, all of those rings, and says that the everyday fan believes it is a team sport only because the 5v5 format happens to be the most culturally popular.
And economically lucrative, let's be real. It's the version on TV.
Right. And Patrick actually calls accepting this view lazy thinking.
He essentially says that anyone who looks at the NBA and concludes basketball is a team sport is acting like a sheep.
Oh, those are fighting words.
He argues that we are allowing television contracts and societal momentum to do our ontological thinking for us.
Which is an incredibly provocative stance. To look at a multi-billion-dollar global industry built around teams and say, you're all misunderstanding what this is.
But Patrick isn't just throwing insults, he backs it up.
He really does. With a rigorous, ruthless philosophical tool, he introduces a concept that we can categorize as the stripping method.
Oh, I love the stripping method. It's a classic reductionist test in philosophy.
Like René Descartes, right? He used variations of this when he tried to strip away everything he could possibly doubt.
Until he was left with only the undeniable truth that he was thinking, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. In this context, Patrick's goal is to identify the true, irreducible essence of basketball by stripping away elements of the game.
One by one, until the activity completely stops being basketball.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's try this out for you guys listening. Let's run the stripping method right now.
Okay, let's do it. Patrick says, look at an NBA game. You have the head coach pacing the sidelines.
Drawing up plays on a whiteboard.
Now, remove the coach entirely. Wipe them out of existence. Are the players on the court still playing basketball?
The answer is undeniably yes.
Of course. Pickup games happen on asphalt courts all over the world every single day without a coach.
Because the coach is an optimizer, not a fundamental requirement.
Okay, so the coach is gone. Now, let's look at the shot clock.
The ticking 24-second timer forcing the offense to move.
Remove the shot clock. Is it still basketball?
Again, yes. If you know your sports history, the NBA didn't even introduce the shot clock until 1954.
Right, specifically to speed up the game because teams were just stalling and holding the ball.
But before 1954, they were still unequivocally playing basketball.
So the shot clock is just a regulatory mechanism to improve the entertainment value. It's not a fundamental necessity.
Exactly. So we've stripped away the coach and the clock. We still have basketball.
Now, here is the huge leap Patrick makes. He says, remove the teammates.
Erase the other 4 players on your team and erase the other 4 players on the opposing team.
All you are left with is just you, one person, defending one other person, one-on-one.
1v1. Is what you are doing still basketball?
And according to the logic of the stripping method, the answer has to be yes.
You are dribbling, you are defending, you are trying to put the ball through the hoop, and someone is trying to stop you.
It is entirely recognizable as the sport.
But the method doesn't stop there. You have to find the actual breaking point.
Patrick says, okay, you were playing 1v1, now remove the ball.
Is it still basketball? No, now it's just 2 people shuffling around on hardwood looking weird. Okay, bring the ball back, but remove the hoop. Take away the physical basket.
Is it basketball? No, now it's just a game of keep away.
Remove the player, obviously. It ceases to exist.
So Patrick's ultimate conclusion is that the elements that actually survive the stripping method are the only fundamental elements.
1 human being, 1 spherical ball, and 1 elevated basket.
Everything else, the teams, the uniforms, the coaches, the defensive schemes, the cheering clouds, they are entirely optional.
They are decorative. They are not essential.
It is a brilliantly constructed, logically airtight progression.
If the activity of basketball can exist in a pure state without teams, but cannot possibly exist without a player, a ball, and a basket,
then the concept of a team cannot be fundamental to the sport.
The individual competing against an obstacle or an opponent is fundamental.
Patrick argues that this definitively proves that our team-centric view of the sport relies purely on aesthetics. It relies on tradition and what the NBA happens to sell on television rather than what is ontologically, mathematically true about the mechanics of the game.
Wait. I hear that, and I respect the elegance of it, but I have to push back a little bit on Patrick's premise here.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's the issue?
Is it possible to strip away too much? Like, can reductionism actually blind us to the reality of a complex system?
Interesting. Give me an example.
Let me throw an analogy at you. Think about a car.
Okay, a car.
If you apply the stripping method to a modern car, you take away the leather seats, the air conditioning, the doors, the roof.
The windshield, the stereo system.
You keep stripping until you have absolutely nothing left but a combustion engine, a steering column, and 4 rubber wheels bolted to a bare metal chassis.
A glorified go-kart.
Right. Now, technically, that contraption can still drive down the street. It propels you forward.
Sure.
But is that fundamentally a car? Or have you stripped away so much of the intended design and purpose that you've just destroyed its essence?
Don't you actually destroy the essence of the thing if you mercilessly strip away what makes it distinctively what it was meant to be?
That is a phenomenal piece of pushback, and it strikes at the exact vulnerability in extreme reductionism.
You are asking if the essence of a thing is found in its smallest part or in the complex whole.
What's fascinating here is that RX4 raises almost this exact same objection in the transcript.
Oh, really? RX4 goes there too?
Yeah. RX4 respects the clean, sterile logic of Patrick's stripping method, but argues aggressively that it misidentifies what the word fundamental means when applied to a sport.
Because removing the opponent, removing the teammates, removing the spatial dynamics.
RX4 says that doesn't leave you with pure distilled basketball. It just leaves you with a basketball drill.
Ah, a drill. That makes so much sense.
It leaves you with raw, isolated athletic skills, entirely stripped of their context.
Yeah, like if I take a soccer ball and go out to my driveway and just kick it against a brick wall over and over again to practice my trapping.
Exactly. No one is going to walk by and say, look, they're engaging in the fundamental sport of soccer.
They'd say, they are practicing a skill for soccer.
Kicking a ball against a wall doesn't make soccer a fundamentally one-player sport against masonry.
Right. So RX4 argues that a sport is not just a collection of atomic physical building blocks.
A sport is a game. And a game, by philosophical definition, is a set of rules defining a specific type of complex competition.
The interactions, the friction, the strategy, that is where the game lives, not in the ball itself.
And this is an incredibly profound moment for you to pause and reflect on how you view the structures in your own life.
Think about your workplace, your family, your social circles.
What other fundamental truths are you holding on to that might actually just be cultural inheritances based on popularity?
When you evaluate a system, are you looking at the irreducible core essence of a thing, or are you looking at all the decorative, complex layers society has stacked on top of it?
Are you confusing the leather seats for the engine, or are you confusing the engine for the experience of the drive?
That's deep. So we hit this massive impasse. The logic of stripping elements away leads us to this philosophical stalemate.
About what constitutes the essence of a constructed game. Does reduction reveal the truth? Or does it destroy the truth?
Because pure logic isn't breaking the deadlock, RX4 decides to pivot entirely.
They move the battleground away from pure logical reduction and into the realm of historical intent.
And to do this, they summon the ghost of Dr. James Naismith.
Yes, the literal inventor of the game.
RX4 introduces this rich historical context to ground the abstract philosophical argument in cold, hard, documented reality.
We have to transport ourselves back to December of 1891.
Dr. James Naismith is a 30-year-old physical education instructor at the International YMCA Training School in Springfield, Massachusetts.
And he was tasked by his boss with a very specific, highly practical problem.
He needed to create an indoor game that would provide athletic distraction and keep a rowdy, bored class of young men physically fit.
During those brutal, freezing New England winters.
Right. He needed a game that could serve as a safer substitute for the brutality of gridiron football or rugby indoors.
Exactly. He wasn't sitting in a quiet room pondering the philosophical nature of solitary human movement.
He had a gym full of restless, aggressive guys he needed to tire out.
And if you look at the history, the very first game he ever organized in that gymnasium featured 2 peach baskets nailed to the lower balcony rail.
And it was played 9 versus 9, 18 guys on the floor.
And that isn't just a historical anecdote, RS4 uses it as foundational evidence.
If you go back and read Naismith's original 13 rules, which he famously typed up and pinned to the bulletin board outside the gym,
they are entirely predicated on multiplayer interaction. The rules constantly reference the opponents.
they talk about the mechanics of passing the ball from person to person.
Because in the original rules, you couldn't actually run with the ball. You had to catch it and throw it from the spot you caught it.
So teamwork wasn't an option. It was the sole mechanism of movement down the court.
Naismith did not sit down in that gymnasium to invent a 1v1 isolation game. He was trying to wrangle an entire class.
RX4 builds a massive wall out of this history. RX4 uses this to argue that the team element isn't just some optional decoration that culturally evolved later on.
It is permanently baked into the ontological DNA of the game as it was originally conceived, invented, and codified by its creator.
The official rules of the NBA today, of FIBA internationally, of the NCAA,
Every single governing body explicitly defines the game in rule number 1 as 2 teams of 5 players competing against each other.
the specific dimensions of the court, the complex timing of the defensive 3-second violations,
The limit on personal fouls, the victory conditions, they are all engineered, calibrated, and built entirely around managing that team structure.
to deny it as a team sport is to deny the blueprint of the architect.
It is a very strong argument based on authority and design.
But Patrick is not intimidated by history. Patrick executes this brilliant, twisting countermaneuver.
Patrick looks at all of that history, acknowledges it, and says, okay, I concede.
Wait, he concedes.
He fully concedes that Dr. Naismith intended to make a team game.
Okay, so how does he counter?
He says that an inventor can unknowingly or unintentionally create something entirely different than their primary conscious intention.
Now, that is a wild concept, the idea that you can build something and not actually understand what you've built.
It is a crucial philosophical and historical distinction. Intention does not always dictate outcome.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Just think about the invention of the microwave.
Oh, yeah.
Percy Spencer was an engineer working on active radar sets during World War II. He was working with a magnetron, a device that generates microwave radio signals.
Right, and he noticed that the candy bar in his pocket had melted.
He didn't sit down at his workbench with the intention of revolutionizing how we heat up leftover pizza.
His intent was military radar.
The functional reality of his invention turned out to be localized food heating. The outcome totally escaped his initial intention.
So Patrick maps this onto basketball.
Exactly. He argues that Naismith unknowingly created a 1v1 game that just so happened, by a stroke of luck or broad design, to be capable of being scaled up to accommodate large teams.
And Patrick points to one undeniable, glaring omission in the historical record to prove this.
Naismith never created a single rule explicitly prohibiting 1v1 play.
The basic underlying mechanical physics of the game, he designed one person holding one ball, trying to put it into one elevated hoop while someone else tries to stop them.
It allows the game to function absolutely perfectly without a single teammate present.
Patrick's logic here is quite sharp. He asserts that if Naismith truly intended for the game to exclusively and only be a team sport,
If teamwork was the absolute irreducible core, he would have naturally introduced structural rules preventing the game from functioning as anything else.
for example, he could have implemented a rule stating a shot is only valid if 3 different players have touched the ball in that possession.
But the absence of such restrictive rules suggests that Naismith left the fundamental mechanical nature of the game incredibly open.
Largely unexplored and ultimately undefined by his own stated intentions.
Let me throw a totally speculative scenario at you just to test the limits of Patrick's theory here.
Yeah, please. Let's hear it.
Imagine it is January 1892, a month after the game is invented. 2 young kids walk up to Dr. Naismith in the Springfield YMCA gym.
Okay.
They have a soccer ball, and they are looking up at the peach basket. But they don't have 16 other friends with them to play the massive 9v9 game.
Right, just the 2 of them.
They look at the creator and ask, "Excuse me, Mr. Naismith, but can we just play 1v1 against each other, try to score on each other? Is that still your game?"
Oh, that's a great question. What happens next?
Would Naismith have looked at those 2 kids, snatched the ball away, and said, "No, absolutely not. Without a team, that ceases to be the entity known as basketball"?
It is highly, highly unlikely.
In fact, as R-Ives 4 actually concedes later in the transcript, Naismith was a highly practical physical educator.
His overriding mandate was health and activity. He wanted people to be moving, sweating, and engaged.
He would have almost certainly smiled and said, "Yes, of course you can play it that way. Have fun."
Exactly. And Patrick seizes on that exact logical inevitability to prove the game's flexible essence.
If the inventor himself would implicitly acknowledge that the stripped-down 1v1 version is still functionally his game,
Then the team format cannot be the irreducible core.
the team format is just a complex layer and optimization added on top of that fundamental 1v1 reality.
What's fascinating here is the deep tension between an inventor's conscious, stated intention versus the actual objective functional reality of their creation once it is released into the world.
But RI4 pushes back hard on this interpretation. RI4 is not ready to surrender the intent argument.
Oh, not at all. RIS4 argues that simply creating a system that can be reduced does not logically equal creating the reduced thing itself.
Right. RIS4 argues that saying Naismith unknowingly created a 1v1 game is wildly reversing the actual temporal and conceptual order of creation.
Naismith created a massive, chaotic team game, and the 1v1 format is merely an extracted byproduct of the individual mechanics necessary to make that team game function.
RI4 even brings in some analogies of their own to mock Patrick's logic.
Let's hear them.
RX4 says it is like claiming the ancient Indian inventor of chess unknowingly created a single-piece sliding game.
Just because you can technically take one rook and slide it around an empty board by yourself.
Exactly. Or claiming that the inventor of the acoustic guitar unknowingly created the solo acoustic guitar, when in reality guitars were designed to cut through the sound of other instruments in a band setting.
You can't just isolate a feature and call it the foundation.
But Patrick holds his ground like a stone wall.
Patrick insists that if a game is inherently capable of being played as a 1v1 sport, and that 1v1 format is structurally simpler,
Mathematically smaller and more foundational than the massive 5v5 team format.
we absolutely cannot deny that fundamental functionality simply because it wasn't the primary thing on Naismith's mind in 1891.
Especially, again, since there is no prohibiting rule. The mechanics of the universe do not care about human intent.
So if intention, what the creator wanted, doesn't dictate the true essence of a thing, what does?
Patrick says it is all about how a thing operates, how it manifests and functions in the real world.
And this leads to what is, without a doubt, my absolute favorite part of this entire deep dive.
Oh, the red diplomat.
Yes. Patrick decides to illustrate his point about function over intent by introducing this incredible, vivid analogy about the red diplomat.
In terms of rhetorical devices, it is a masterful stroke of narrative logic.
Okay, let me set the stage and lay this out for you guys. Imagine two massive warring kingdoms.
The Red Kingdom and the Blue Kingdom.
Right. The Red King, desiring to establish some sort of treaty or perhaps gather intelligence, appoints his most highly intelligent, loyal officer to a new position.
He gives him the official title of the Red Diplomat.
The diplomat's intended function, obviously, given his title and the king's orders, is to serve the Red Kingdom.
To negotiate fiercely on their behalf, to protect their interests.
Right. That is the assigned title, and that is the stated intent of the creator of the role.
But the diplomat travels to the neutral zone. He starts holding secret meetings with the blue diplomat.
And, plot twist, he falls madly in love with her.
Oh, wow.
He becomes completely compromised. He abandons his loyalty.
He starts stealing vital classified intelligence from the Red Kingdom and funneling it secretly to the Blue Kingdom.
He writes letters influencing the Red King to pass economic laws that secretly actually favor the Blue Kingdom's trade routes.
So he acts entirely, 100%, in the interest of the enemy.
So in every measurable physical way, he functions as a traitor.
Exactly. He is a traitor.
So Patrick pauses his analogy and asks RX4 this central defining question.
Do we name this person? Do we define his essence based on his intended title, which is diplomat?
Or do we define him based on his actual function in the real world, which is traitor or enemy spy?
And Patrick argues that it would serve the Red Kingdom best to call him what he actually is, based on how he functions.
To keep calling him a diplomat because of his intended title would be fatal to the kingdom.
He maps this concept directly, one-to-one, onto the sport of basketball.
Basketball was undeniably created with the intention that it be a team sport.
However, because its mechanics allow it to function absolutely perfectly as a 1v1 game, we must define it by that irreducible function.
We must call the game what it is capable of being at its core, not what its creator intended it to be in a crowded gym.
It makes so much intuitive sense. We have that old saying, right? If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
It doesn't matter if the eccentric geneticist who bred it was trying to create a swan. It's a duck.
It is very persuasive narrative. But RX4 is incredibly sharp, and RX4 spots a critical, perhaps fatal philosophical flaw in mapping a human diplomat onto a constructed game.
What's the flaw?
RX4 points out that a diplomat is a human being.
Okay, sure.
The human being possesses consciousness, free will, and moral agency. They have a sense of responsibility, and they have the cognitive ability to consciously choose to betray a defined duty.
Okay, I see where this is going.
A game, RS4 argues, does not have agency. A game is merely an inanimate set of rules and physical boundaries created for a specific purpose.
Its function depends entirely on how human beings choose to apply those rules.
RA4 argues that we must judge a game not by its simplest possible stripped-down misuse, but by what its rules were uniquely structured to achieve when fully, properly operating.
And when fully operating, basketball's function, its unique defining characteristic among all other sports, is complex spatial team coordination, trying to overcome complex spatial team disruption.
Wait. Here's where it gets really interesting. I'm reading RX4's defense here, and I actually think RX4 walks right into a trap.
How do you mean? What kind of trap?
If a game doesn't have agency, doesn't that make Patrick's point about function even stronger?
Oh, think about it. The diplomat had free will. He chose to be a traitor, thereby actively rebelling against his intent.
But a game, like basketball, cannot choose to rebel.
It can't choose to be a team sport or a 1v1 sport. It simply is whatever its physical mechanics dictate it must be.
It has zero loyalty to James Naismith's intentions because it has no brain.
If the raw physics and mechanics of the game naturally allow for a 1v1 format, and that 1v1 format is the simplest, most irreducible form of the activity,
then the game is functionally a 1v1 game at its core, completely devoid of any intent, agency, or loyalty to the 19th century.
that is a profoundly strong defense of Patrick's position. You are arguing that without agency, the physical constraints are the only truth.
But RX4 maintains that function must inherently include the full competitive logic that the rules enable.
RX4 believes you cannot simply ignore the complex multiplayer interactions that the rules were specifically mathematically designed to foster.
And this,
Oh yeah, what follows is what I like to call the war of analogies.
the Red Diplomat was just the opening salvo.
In the ensuing pages, both debaters abandon basketball entirely and just start hurling analogies at each other.
Trying desperately to map their philosophical frameworks onto everyday, mundane objects to see whose logic survives the stress test.
It is fascinating to read. It becomes a relentless test of whose framework can withstand the most extreme hypothetical distortion.
And RX4, clearly feeling the heat from the diplomat, comes back swinging with the lasagna analogy.
Oh, the lasagna. This is where you might get hungry. Let's break this one down.
RX4 says, imagine a master chef creates a brand new recipe for a dish called lasagna.
It is inherently a layered dish: pasta, ricotta cheese, meat sauce, mozzarella, meant to be baked together and served to multiple people.
RX4 argues that you would never say, the chef unknowingly created a single boiled noodle dish that just happens to be capable of being stacked into lasagna.
Sure, you can technically pull out one single noodle, boil it, put it on a plate, and eat it.
And true, the chef didn't explicitly forbid eating a single noodle, but he created lasagna.
The noodle is merely a component of the intended whole.
RX4 is utilizing this culinary metaphor to demonstrate that Patrick's logic reverses the natural order of creation and definition.
Just as a single sheet of pasta is merely a building block of the complex entity known as lasagna, the 1v1 mechanics of dribbling and shooting are merely the building blocks of the complex entity known as team basketball.
The part does not define the whole.
That's a great analogy. It really makes you think.
It does, but Patrick completely dismantles this. He just shreds the lasagna analogy entirely.
How so?
Patrick points out that lasagna, as a concept, didn't exist since the dawn of time. Someone created it, and society gave it a strict functional definition.
Lasagna is, by definitional reality, noodles, sauce, and cheese baked together.
If you just take a single boiled noodle, flop it onto a white plate, and serve it to a patron at an Italian restaurant, it absolutely does not meet the definition of lasagna.
They would send it back. No reasonable person would look at it and call it lasagna.
And here's the kicker, if you take one basketball player, one ball, and one hoop,
Yeah.
and that player is trying to score against one defender on a driveway,
It does meet the functional, visual, and physical criteria of Naismith's game.
anyone driving past that house would look out their window and say, those kids are playing basketball.
Exactly. It is a stunning rebuttal. The single noodle utterly fails the functional test of being lasagna.
But 1v1 basketball flawlessly passes the functional test of being basketball. It retains its identity even when reduced.
It is a brilliant surgical parry by Patrick.
Realizing the culinary route has failed, RX4 immediately tries another angle, moving from food to high art, the symphony analogy.
Right. RX4 elevates the discourse. RX4 says, consider a grand symphony, like Beethoven's Ninth.
You could technically isolate the first violin sheet music and have someone play that single melody on a solo violin in an empty room.
But a symphony is not fundamentally a solo piece of music.
The full orchestra, the cellos, the brass, the timpani, the woodwinds, working in harmonious concert, is the intended, necessary, and richest expression of the music.
This analogy introduces a brand new, highly significant concept from RX4, the idea of the richest expression, which is going to become the entire battleground of the next section.
But before we get there, Patrick counters the symphony with an analogy of his own, specifically addressing this idea of misuse, alternative use, and foundational purpose.
He introduces the smartphone and the hammer.
This one is so grounded in our modern reality. We've all seen someone use a tool for the completely wrong purpose because they were in a rush.
The argument goes like this. Imagine you manufacture a highly sophisticated $1,000 smartphone.
It happens to be heavy enough and encased in strong enough titanium that if you were desperate, you could grip it in your hand and use the corner of it to hammer a small nail into a piece of drywall to hang a picture.
If it successfully drives the nail, is the smartphone fundamentally a hammer?
RX4 would immediately say no. Obviously not. It is fundamentally a communication and computing device.
The fact that it can function as a crude hammer is a trivial, accidental byproduct of its weight and material density.
And Patrick completely agrees with RX4.
Wait, really? He agrees?
Yes. But Patrick explains why the smartphone hammer dynamic is entirely different from the 5v5 1v1 basketball dynamic.
Oh, I see.
He says if you use your iPhone as a hammer, you completely and utterly lose its core conceptual purpose, which is communication.
If you smash a nail with it, the glass screen shatters, the microchips break, it can no longer make phone calls or connect to Wi-Fi.
Its essence is destroyed by the alternative use.
But if you take the 5v5 game of basketball and you reduce it to play 1v1, it doesn't break.
It retains its exact, pristine core concept. The physical act of a human trying to score a ball into a designated hoop against the resistance of an opponent.
Patrick then refines the smartphone analogy to perfectly, elegantly map his own argument about what is truly foundational.
He says, think about what a smartphone is, fundamentally, at its absolute lowest level of classification.
It is a telephone. It is a device for making audible communication.
You can layer on millions of other complex functions. You can add high-definition texting, web browsing, a flashlight, a scientific calculator, a 4K camera, social media algorithms.
But if you strip all of those amazing complex apps away, what are you left with? At its core foundation, it is a phone.
Yes. Oh, it fits perfectly.
You can layer on 4 extra teammates. You can layer on a head coach.
You can layer on intricate pick-and-roll plays, zone defenses, shot clocks, and massive roaring arenas onto the game of basketball.
But if you strip all those layers away, at its core, it is one human trying to score on one hoop against one defender.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire exhausted war of analogies is really asking us a deeply uncomfortable question about ourselves.
It is asking us to consider how often in our daily lives we desperately confuse the layers or the ornamental decorations of a system with its actual unglamorous core foundation.
We do this endlessly. We mistake the exhausting complexity of our corporate jobs, the endless meetings, the synergy, the org charts, for the fundamental truth of what we are doing, which is trading our labor for capital.
We mistake the societal structures of our relationships for the fundamental connection between two people.
And that profound realization, that tendency to get lost in the layers, reveals something crucial about our source material.
It reveals that Patrick and ROX4 aren't actually arguing about the sport of basketball anymore.
They haven't been for a while. The analogies prove that they are at a total grinding impasse because they are fundamentally disagreeing on what the word fundamental actually means in the English language.
We have fully crossed over from a sports debate into pure semantics, linguistics, and the philosophy of language.
This semantic divergence is the absolute crux of the entire deep dive. It is the hinge upon which the whole debate swings.
We have two competing definitions: richest expression versus irreducible minimum.
Let's outline RI4's definition first, because it aligns with how most people colloquially use language.
RX4 states that fundamental means, quote, the essential character and distinctive mode of the activity.
And so, building on that definition, RX4 argues that the team format is fundamental because it contains the richest expression of the game.
RX4 argues that when you watch high-level 5v5 basketball, You see the game fully realized.
You get the beauty of off-ball screens. You get the anticipation of help defense, the unselfishness of passing, the geometry of spacing, the chaotic ballet of complex defensive rotations.
RX4 passionately believes that if you strip away the team, you strip away the soul. You remove the game's unique identity.
You reduce it to a generic, repetitive throw ball and hoop drill, and it loses everything that makes it distinctively basketball, rather than just another rudimentary target game like tossing a wad of paper into a trash can.
RX4 uses the word holistic repeatedly in this section. They're looking at the sport as a complete, living ecosystem.
They are arguing that the true nature of a complex game is best determined by looking at what makes it distinctive, beautiful, and worth dedicating one's life to playing.
It shouldn't be determined by whatever miserable solitary fragment is left over when you destructively remove everything possible.
It's an argument for beauty and complexity.
But Patrick, acting as the cold logician, counters this brilliantly.
Patrick says that words like richest and holistic and complex are the exact, literal, definitional opposites of the word fundamental.
Patrick's worldview is austere. He believes that fundamental means the irreducible minimum.
What is the absolute, unshakable base layer upon which everything else must be built?
Patrick argues that things like screens, defensive rotations, and backdoor cuts, while they are undeniably cool, while they require immense skill, and while they make the NBA a thrilling television product, they are ultimately ornamental.
They are decorative. They are trivial details in the grand ontological scheme of the game, precisely because the core game can, and does, exist perfectly well without them.
You do not need to run a pick and roll to play basketball. You do not need to pass to play basketball.
Therefore, Patrick states, a pick and roll and a pass mathematically cannot be fundamental to the sport.
This is where the intellectual tension reaches its absolute peak. You have two entirely incompatible worldviews colliding.
RX4 believes the fundamental identity of basketball is a fluid, dynamic, multiplayer contest between organized offensive strategies and organized defensive strategies.
Patrick believes the absolute fundamental identity is one solitary person shooting one ball at one metal hoop.
So what does this all mean? How do we break a tie when the neighbors are speaking two different languages?
I want to point out the extreme, almost existential danger in RX4's logic here.
And Patrick spots this weakness and calls him out on it directly and ruthlessly in the transcript.
During a defense of the team aspect, RX4 accidentally lets a phrase slip. RX4 types that basketball, quote, is known and valued for being a team contest.
Yes, that was a fatal linguistic misstep. RX4 realizes it almost immediately and tries to walk it back later, sensing it was a philosophical trap.
But the trap was already sprung. The jaws snapped shut. Think about the terrifying implication of that phrase.
If we define the fundamental truth of a thing merely by what the majority of society currently knows and values it to be in this case, because the rich, complex, highly popular 5v5 NBA version is on primetime television.
We are allowing popularity to literally construct reality.
Yeah.
You are saying truth is a democracy.
It is the ultimate cultural blind spot, the ultimate conformity trap.
Imagine a counterfactual history. Imagine if, due to some quirk of early 20th century economics, large teams were too expensive to maintain.
And so, massive 1v1 basketball tournaments became the global phenomenon.
Imagine if 1v1 was what sold out Madison Square Garden, what got the billion-dollar television deals, what kids bought video games of.
If that had happened, our entire society would know and value basketball as a 1v1 sport.
We would consider the idea of adding 4 extra people to the court absurd.
Truth, fundamental ontological truth, cannot be dependent on Nielsen TV ratings or historical accidents of popularity.
Exactly. And Patrick refuses to budge an inch on this point. He delivers this incredible line.
He essentially says, I will not join the unthinking masses who allow the culture to do their thinking for them.
It is such a mic drop moment in the debate. But even with that rhetorical flourish, we are still stuck.
The two of them are at an absolute, immovable granite impasse over the definition of this single pivotal word, fundamental.
There is no more logic to deploy. There are no more analogies to invent.
There's only one place left to go.
They have to appeal to the final objective authority, the arbiter of the English language.
The dictionary drop. We have reached the climax of this rigorous intellectual combat.
Patrick, having exhausted all logic, all historical debate, and all analogies, decides to pull the actual literal receipts.
He doesn't just go to one dictionary. He goes to the Oxford English Dictionary. He goes to the Cambridge Dictionary. He goes to Merriam-Webster.
He goes deep into the archives and pulls the mid-15th century Latin etymology of the word itself, fundamentalis.
It is a devastating barrage of citations. And this is where the debate, which has raged over pages and pages of text, is definitively factually settled.
Let me read these definitions to you, because if you are holding on to the idea that basketball is a team sport, these definitions are going to be devastating to hear.
Go for it.
Oxford defines fundamental as serving as a base or foundation. Cambridge defines it as forming the base from which everything else develops.
Merriam-Webster defines it as one of the minimum constituents without which a thing would not be what it is.
And if you look at the Latin root, fundamentalis, derived from fundamentum, it literally translates to of the foundation.
It refers to the lowest load-bearing masonry of a building.
Across the board, across centuries of linguistic development, the dictionaries completely, undeniably, and thoroughly validate Patrick's stripping method.
The word fundamental, by its literal definition, has absolutely nothing to do with the richest expression or complexity or holistic ecosystems or beauty.
It is strictly, literally, and mathematically about the base foundation, the irreducible minimum constituent.
What's truly fascinating here, and frankly deeply refreshing, is RI4's reaction to this linguistic bombardment.
If you have ever witnessed or participated in an argument on the internet, you know that people almost never concede.
They double down, they pivot, they insult. But RX4 provides a genuinely rare, intellectually honest conception.
RX4 looks at the overwhelming weight of the dictionary definitions and admits defeat on this front.
RX4 types that their use of the word fundamental was, quote, looser, more philosophical.
Which is a very polite way of saying they were wrong.
RX4 essentially admits they were trying to stretch and distort the definition of the word to forcefully make it fit their pre-existing, culturally ingrained idea that basketball must be a team sport.
Instead of shaping their idea around the actual definition of the word, they wanted the conclusions so badly that they redefined the parameters of language to reach it.
They wanted it to be a team sport, so they redefined fundamental to mean complex, just so their argument would survive.
It is a phenomenal moment of self-reflection. RX4 literally concedes in the transcript, writing, "By the standard, strict definition of fundamental, your position is stronger."
They admit that the single player, the ball, and the hoop constitute the foundational unit.
You can entirely remove the teams, you can remove the complex strategies, you can remove the passing, and the physical activity still functions recognizably as basketball.
But you cannot remove the single individual player with the ball. Therefore, that solitary individual is the fundamental base.
It is a total, undeniable victory for Patrick's reductionist framework.
By the true, literal dictionary definition of the word fundamental, Patrick's logic is absolutely bulletproof.
And so, the central mission of our deep dive today is achieved. We can state it clearly to you without any ambiguity, based entirely on the rigorous deconstruction in the source text.
It is unequivocally established. Basketball is fundamentally a 1v1 sport.
Everything else that you see when you turn on your television, the 5 players moving in unison, the intricate zone defenses, the shouting head coaches, the massive arenas, the NBA Finals trophy, all of it is just layering.
It is a massive, complex, beautiful decoration added on top of that singular, fundamental 1v1 reality.
This has been such an incredible, exhausting, and rewarding intellectual journey.
Just think about where we started an hour ago. We started with an assumed cultural truth, a default setting hardwired into our brains that basketball is a team sport.
Then we applied the ruthless logic of the stripping method.
We navigated the incredibly tricky historical waters of an inventor's stated intent versus the actual objective function of their invention in the real world.
We survived a brutal, hilarious gauntlet of analogies involving treasonous diplomats, single noodles of lasagna, and smartphones used as hammers.
And ultimately, we drilled down until we hit the absolute bedrock truth at the foundational root of language itself.
If we connect this journey to the bigger picture, the broader lesson here for you is profound and deeply practical.
Never, ever let culture do your thinking for you. Just because everyone in your social circle or everyone on television knows and values a thing to be true doesn't actually make it the foundational reality.